All right, I'd like to welcome you to the book of Genesis. We are in chapter 33 tonight, and our goal is to finish that and to get through Genesis 34 as well. You should be in the middle of page 213 in our notes, letter C. And also those online, you should have received from me an email that had your quiz as well as page 215 through 221. That will cover Genesis chapter number 34. But we will begin in chapter 33 at verse number 12 tonight. And that's middle of page 213. Let's read those few verses there, and we'll open with a word of prayer. Chapter number 33 of the book of Genesis, verse number 12, the Bible says, "And he said, Let us take our journey, and let us go, and I will go before thee. And he said unto him, My Lord knoweth that the children are tender, and the flocks and herds with young are with me. And if men should overdrive them one day, all the flock will die. Let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on softly, according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure, until I come unto my Lord unto Seir." Let's go to Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this evening. Father, I thank you for the opportunity that we have to be at this place, to study your word, to be a part of this study, Father. Lord, I just pray that your will might be done tonight. Lord, may we make things clear and understandable. Lord, ultimately, Father, that is, Lord, I need your wisdom. I need your strength, Father, to complete this task. And Lord, I pray that you would just bless this time now. May it honor and glorify you, Lord, we pray. And thank you, Father, for those here. Thank you, Father, for those joining us online and for the testimonies of those, Lord, and the work that they're involved in. Lord, I just pray that you might bless this time. May you bless the class to follow. And Lord, that all that's said and done here tonight would bring honor and glory to your precious and holy name. For it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. We have been looking at the life of Jacob for some time now. And we covered last week where we finished up where Jacob wrestled with the angel of the Lord, where he wrestled with the Lord all night, where he then would face his brother Esau, not knowing what would happen. And yet he faces his brother, and the Lord brings Jacob through that. And we see that's where it brings us to us tonight, where it will complete that this evening. Esau has he proposes an offer to Jacob that he would go before him and would see him into the land that he's come to, and Jacob doesn't want to do that. Now, there's a lot of practical things we can look at in that. But understand that Jacob sees that Esau, from just the practical standpoint at that point in time, historically, Jacob knows that he's got cattle. He himself has cattle. He has children. He has young ones, and he knows that Esau here, it's all these grown men. They have animals to ride, and he knows that the family cannot keep up with them. The other thing that you need to consider, too, from the standpoint of the way the Lord has ordered this, Jacob is the one that's supposed to lead his family. He doesn't need to be following Esau. The order in which the Lord has done all this is an order that he has placed. Now, so he offers this. He offers protection. He says, I will go before thee. It means that Esau would lead. And remember that the Lord has said that Jacob would be the one that was chosen. He's the one that's chosen. He's the one that's chosen for the land. He's the one that's been given the promise. And so from a standpoint of the order that God has given, this would be contrary to the promise that God has made. Jacob doesn't need to be following Esau. Jacob needs to be leading his family. He needs to be the one. He's the one that's been handed the promise. So he needs to sever those ties from Esau, if you will. Now, what about just from an application for us? Well, remember that Esau all this time in our studies off and on has been that picture of that man of the world, right? Jacob is that spiritual man, correct? And the spiritual man doesn't need to have anything to do with the man of the world in his life. Now, that doesn't mean you're not a witness. It doesn't mean that you're not trying to be a witness and trying to be a help and trying to be an encouragement and trying to do all those things. But from the standpoint of influence, from the standpoint of your family, from the standpoint of all those things that's important, you don't need that world's influence in your life. Think about it for just a minute. Remember, Esau is Edom. Remember? And we don't need that in our life. And so Jacob, at this point, protests this proposal. He gives the excuse that, they're not going to be able to keep up. It's not going to be good for them. And so Jacob refuses this offer. Now, look, if you will, to Proverbs chapter number 4. And this is something in addition to what we already have in our notes here. Proverbs 4, very practical, I know, but again, just from the standpoint of application. Proverbs 4, verse number 14, we read this. It says, "Enter not into the path of the wicked, and go not in the way of evil men." Again, I understand from the context, we know that Esau is not the man he was when he said, "Hey, I'm going to kill my brother. Hey, I'm going to find him. I'm going to hunt him down. I want to kill him." But again, from just the application, from just the picture, we know that as we've been looking through and we've been making application, Esau is that picture of that man of the world, and Jacob's that picture of that spiritual man. We need to sever ties with the world. We don't need to have anything to do with the world. I know we have to work in it. We have to be a part of it in the sense of on our daily lives. But from our spiritual man, we need to, as much as possible, separate ourselves from the things of the world if we can. Now you say, how do you do that? I'm not saying that we need to go live like the Amish, okay? We've got to live in this world, but we don't have to be of the world. We need to separate ourselves where we can. For some of us, that means we do need to not have every last technological advancement. For some of us, that means you got to know for yourself, with you and the Lord, what you need to put away. But we have got to have safeguards in our lives. And we have to separate ourselves. We don't have all the influence of the world in your life. Don't have all the things of this world in your life. Don't listen to the world's music. Don't take part in certain things of the world, because the world will destroy you. And we see here in Proverbs 4:14, again, enter not into the path of the wicked. For some that means those people you can work with, but they're not going to be your best friends. You're not going to go hang with them after work. You're not going to do the things that they do, because eventually it's going to rub off. And I remember when I was in a warehouse environment and I was working a line. I remember early on there were those that says, "Hey, why don't you go out? Hey, let's go down here." And then as soon as they figured out who I was and what I was about, then they would sometimes make jokes, And I knew what they were doing. Out of earshot, they were probably making, crazy jokes, crude jokes about Jonathan. But that's fine. That's the way the world is. They're gonna take the shots at things that's easy to take shots at. But we have got to separate. The world walks differently from the believer. And that's what I have noted here, just addition in my notes here. The world is going to walk different from the believer. And that means that the believer has to walk different from the world. So, in application, Esau being a picture of the world, Jacob couldn't go along with. He's going to have to blaze his own trail. He's going to have to take his own walk. And it's going to be different from that of Esau's. Now, I know from contextually, we know Esau's a different man. I understand that. And he's not the man that had threatened Jacob's life before, 20 years before. He is a changed man. So Esau went his own way, and he found out he could not budge Jacob to follow him. Now, we also see the courses after the reunion. Esau here, verse number 16, verse 15, 16 here, it says, And Esau said, Let me now leave thee with some of the folk that are with me. And he said, What needeth it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way unto Seir. So even after this, Esau says, Well, let me leave you some of the men. And he's like, No. Let me go the way that I'm supposed to go. Don't worry about it. But Esau then goes back to Seir. He's going to go back to the land of Edom. Remember, Esau is Edom. Seir is Mount Seir. You got Seir there in Edom. And you have Jacob. What does Jacob do? Verse number 17, it says, And Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and built him an house, and made booths for his cattle. Therefore the name of the place is called Succoth. And Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Padan Aram, and pitched his tent before the city. And he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent at the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. And he erected there an altar and called it Israel. So now we see that Jacob goes to this place. He goes to the land of Hamor, of Shechem's, here in the land of Canaan. So this is where we leave off. And this is not, if we just stop there, you think, okay, well, now he's come into the land of Canaan. He's come to Shalem here. He's come to Shechem's here. What's the big deal? Well, it's going to be a big deal, because now he's come to a place that's going to have, the outcome's not going to be good for Jacob. And that's where it brings us to chapter number 34. So this gets us into our new notes now this evening. And if you will, look at page number 215. Page 215. And notice here, verse number 1. It says, And Dinah, the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and defiled her. And his soul clave unto Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. And he loved the damsel, and spake kindly unto the damsel. And Shechem spake unto his father Hamor, saying, Get me this damsel to wife. And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah his daughter. Now his sons were with his cattle in the field, and Jacob held his peace until they were come. Jacob comes and he stays in this land. He takes a piece of land here, and this was probably a bad move on Jacob's part. He comes into the land here, he gets a piece here, and he's close to these people. And what happens? Dinah goes out and looks upon the land, upon the people here. Notice here, it says, And went out to see the daughters of the land. So what happens? Well, there's an immoral act that takes place. Shechem, the son of Hamor, Hamor is the prince of the land. He defiles Dinah here. And in all this, we see that he does something that defiles her and really brings an abomination into the land. Now, as we've already established in our study of the book of Genesis, sin will always take you further than you ever thought you would go. It will. Now, let me just say this. The other thing that you see here is that Dinah goes out into the land here and starts to see the daughters of the land. So what does she do? She ventures out. And please don't misunderstand me. I'm not placing all the blame on her. But I will say this. She goes out there and she starts looking. Was it because she was looking because she was interested? Maybe it was curiosity. But here's the thing that you're going to find. Your curiosity will sometimes take you somewhere that you should never be. Right? If she'd have stayed close to home, there might not have been this opportunity. And listen, you've got to guard you've got to think about where you're going in your life and where you're taking yourself, because curiosity in the world can draw you in and destroy you. Think about it for just a minute. Some have said for Dinah that she was likely maybe 14, 15 here. Some have said that. Some have said a little older. Some have said a little younger. But let's just say she was. Let's say she's 14 or 15 here. You've got a young woman that is looking at the daughters of the land. Was it because she was longing for what they had? Maybe. Maybe it was just curiosity, as we've already stated. Maybe it was fully innocent. But listen, this world, curiosity starts everything. Think about it. You see something, say, hey, that's kind of interesting. And it draws you in and pulls you into something, and you give it a second look, a third look, a fourth look, and it draws you in, and before it's all said and done, you're wrapped up in something that you never thought you would get so far into. Maybe that was the case with Dinah. She didn't have cell phones, but there was still that draw. Hey, those people live differently. That's pretty neat. Today, young lady, young man, I don't know how many times I've heard it. Just a young lady, maybe she gets pulled in by some boy, and she hears something, he says something, and you hear about 14, 15, 16-year-olds that are going missing. We just recently had one in the community. Thankfully, they found her. But listen, sin will entrap you with what it has to offer, and it looks good on the outside until you're in. And then you're in and you can't get out. But notice here, this passion, this sin of passion here, had this been kept moral, had he seen her and said, "Hey, I like what I see, and I know there's a lot I could say to that. Hey, Dad, can you go ask Jacob about her?" But he forced her, and he defiled her. And that right there was a sin that should have been handled, should have been taken care of. But remember, this is the son of the prince of the land. He took her, he lay with her, he defiled her. And the wording tells us exactly what we need to know to determine the kind of act that we're dealing with. The wording suggests that he forced her. The word defiled makes the case of how far he went. He defiled this young woman. Now, this defilement, defiled is defined, means to be made unclean or polluted. And 3 times when this word is mentioned in this chapter, it's spoken of as an unclean thing, an unclean act. Immorality has taken place. We see here, he defiled her. This intimacy was also foolish. Notice verse number 7. The sons of Jacob. This is what the sons of Jacob had to say here. And you know how Jacob handles this and how his sons handle this. There's blame to go around when everything's said and done in this chapter, because what happens is one sinful act is going to cause the death of many people. Do you understand that one thing that happens can destroy a people? Notice here what the sons of Jacob have to say, verse number 7. And the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very wroth, because he had wrought folly in Israel in lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. Now, we don't have the law yet. Moses' law is not done, but it's still, it's a wrong act. It's wrong. It's not supposed to be done. Now, in this passage, this immorality is described in this chapter as folly. And we understand that such immorality is always folly, as it's not only hurts those directly involved, but it hurts those indirectly involved. Later, the law of Moses, God's law, it describes this as it defiles a land, and it hurts future generations in many cases. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter number 22. Deuteronomy 22. Let's look at some verses on this. Deuteronomy 22, look at verse number 21. 21 here. It says, Then they shall bring out the damsel to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her with stones that she die, because she hath wrought folly in Israel, to play the whore in her father's house. So shalt thou put evil away from among you. Now, this is talking about a woman that she is of ill repute, that the Bible would call in some places, and it's called folly. What Shechem does to Dinah is folly. The Bible's very clear about it. It's wrong. It's wicked. It's wrong. Now, this is the law. This has been reiterated here in Deuteronomy, but it's the law. Also notice, look at Judges. Judges chapter number 19. Judges chapter number 19. We have a couple of occasions here where we see things like this take place, and again, the Bible's clear about it. Judges 19, verse number 23, it says, And the man, the master of the house, went out unto them and said unto them, Nay, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not so wickedly, seeing that this man is come into mine house. Do not this folly. Now, these were sons of Belial. This is later in the book of Judges, and you have where these sons of Belial, they're asking about the old man. I mean, this tells us that you have what sounds familiar to what Sodom was going on. Again, this act, this immorality is known as folly in the land. What you read in Deuteronomy is mentioned as folly in the land. You know, God's very clear on what relationships are supposed to be like. He's very clear in the law of Moses. He's very clear in the New Testament. And, you know, our times may have changed, but God doesn't change. You know, what was considered wrong 50, 60, 70 years ago, sometimes 80 years ago. Listen, things like what I've just read, what has happened with Dinah, but even what is consensual, even 70 years ago, would have been looked upon in the community as wrong. And now, what's wrong with that? Man's gauge of morality may have moved, but God's gauge has not moved. And I know in some circles, and maybe even those watching tonight, I mean, maybe that's making you uncomfortable. But God's gauge of morality has not changed. It's always been. And so this act is wrong. As we can see as we go through the Bible, it's wrong. And in some places, God lumps men with men and women with women along with witchcraft and everything else as an abomination. Here's something that, and I've not completely done the study, but here's what I found. When I look in the Old Testament, when God says something is an abomination, it's an abomination in the New Testament too. You see, God's morality and God's level of holiness has not changed. It's just man has changed. And says, well, that's just old. We don't do that anymore. Well, actually, God has not changed in all those things. And so this is folly. Twice in the book of Judges, we see it called folly. Here, with the Benjamites here, we see this happen. What happens is the old man's not given up, but the maiden and his concubine, the concubine is put out the door, and the men, these sons of Belial in the city, do unspeakable things to her, and the land has to be corrected. The people around that area come in and take care of business because of what had happened, of what's happened. Look at Judges chapter number 20, verse number 6. We see here it says, And I took my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed lewdness and folly in Israel. So what has happened? Well, the children of Israel rise up and come into that place, and they destroy because of what had happened by the hand of these people in Judges chapter number 19. It's called folly. Also, notice 2 Samuel 13. I have it. We have it partially written out there, but let's go ahead and turn over there. Interestingly enough, we see this passage here. This These are children of David. And if you're familiar with the story, we have Tamar here. And Tamar is a sister of Absalom. But Amnon is a half-brother, and he loves Tamar. Well, what does he do? Well, he doesn't think he can do anything to her, but then he has a friend that gives him advice on what he can do. And what does he do? He forces her. Similar to what we have going on in our passage tonight. And you know what we see here? Verse number 13, it says, And I, whither shall I cause my shame to go? And as for thee, thou shalt be as one of the fools in Israel. Now therefore, I pray thee, speak unto the king, for he will not withhold me from thee. Tamar is at a point where she's trying to reason with Amnon and saying, look, don't do this. You're going to be counted as a fool in Israel if you do this. But he doesn't listen. He forces her. But what does she say? You're going to be a fool. What you're doing is foolish. It's folly. And again, you see it named as much in the Bible. Notice something else. Look at Proverbs chapter number 1. Proverbs chapter number 1. Proverbs 1, verse number 32. Now it's interesting here. We see the simple and the fool compared to each other here. It says, For the turning away of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. Notice also Proverbs chapter number 8, the simple and the foolish. Proverbs chapter number 8, verse number 5. O ye simple, understand wisdom, and ye fools, be of an understanding heart. What does wisdom say? Well, as she cries at the gates, notice verse number 3 there, the context. As she cries at the gates, she cries, ye fools, be of an understanding heart. What is she trying to say? Well, don't be foolish. Get some understanding. What you're doing will bring folly to your life, to your community. That is folly, and that's destruction. And what does she cry to the simple? Understand wisdom. Don't be foolish anymore. See, the simple are warned of such sinful conduct. Look now back to Proverbs chapter number 7. So I read verse 5 of chapter 8, so you can see the connection there. The simple and the foolish are lumped together. There's a difference between the two, but they're closely associated with one another. But look at Proverbs 7. And I know this is a little lengthy, but I think I want you to see it in context here. It's talking about that woman that's wicked, and you see the simple man. The simple young man comes into the city here. Verse number 4. It says, Say unto wisdom, Thou art my sister, and call understanding thy kinswoman, that they may keep thee from the strange woman, from the stranger which flattereth with her words. For at the window of my house I looked through my casement, and beheld among the simple ones, I discerned among the youths a young man void of understanding. So what happens? Again, I'm just going to pick and choose here, but basically, you have this young man that's simple. He's almost foolish. He passes through the streets. He doesn't quite understand that he's getting himself. He's going further into where it's hard to get out of the trap. He passes by the corner of this place that's wrong, that's wicked. And notice here, it says, And behold, there met him a woman with the attire of an harlot and subtle of heart. Notice subtle of heart. Now we go further, look further down, and what has happened? And I'm just going to skip down. Notice here, verse 21, With her much fair speech she caused him to yield. With the flattering of her lips she forced him. He goeth after her straightway, as an ox goeth to the slaughter, or as a fool. See, here's the thing about simple. There's some hope for the simple, but they act like the foolish. But notice how it's compared. Or as a fool to the correction of the stocks. Till a dart strike through his liver, as a bird hasteth to the snare, and knoweth not it is for his life. See, here's the thing about sin. And I know this is probably basic, and I understand that. But but I think it's good for all of us to hear, and it's good for those to hear again. Sin paints a pretty picture. Sin looks good. But boy, when it's done, notice what it's going for. It's not just going part way. I mean, it's a dart that strikes through the liver. And notice here, and knoweth not that it's for his life. Listen, you know what sin can do? In some cases, it can take your physical life. But if it doesn't take your physical life, it could take your life in general from what you could have or should have or could have done or would have done, and you're a shell of what you were. And you're close to you're close to that physical death. It will destroy you. Notice what wisdom says. Hearken to me now, therefore, O ye children, and attend to the words of my mouth. Let not thine heart decline to her ways. Go not astray in her paths. Now, it's interesting because the narrator, the Holy Spirit, is typifying wisdom as a woman, and he's also typifying wickedness as a woman, and he's painting the picture of wickedness as a harlot. He's painting the picture of the wisdom as that are on the housetops crying out, saying, hey, live. Here's wisdom. You want wisdom? Here's wisdom. There's one that's good, and there's one that's bad. And it's interesting that the Bible even talks about that a wife that's a virtuous woman is a woman that has wisdom. But also wisdom is painted as a woman, and you have wickedness painted as a woman, but in real physical life, you have those women that are of ill repute, that are wickedness. Now, isn't it interesting? The Lord you've got that spiritual side, but you also have that real physical side of both. And you see here that wisdom now is saying, let not thine heart decline to her ways, wickedness, sinfulness, and go not astray in her paths, for she hath cast down many wounded. And notice this, yea, many strong men have been slain by her. Her house is the way to hell, going down to the chambers of death. And again, it can start out subtle. In the case of Dinah here, let me just say, again, we don't know her true heart, but for sake of argument, let's say that she went out thinking about, oh, that looks so good, that's so wonderful, and it drew her in, and she got away from home and drawn into the things of the land, and it pulled her in, and she got out there and she got away from where protection was. Listen, again, I know most watching this are going to be on up in age, so to speak. They may not be a teens, but maybe there is. It's sitting at home, looking at this, maybe auditing this. Listen, safeguards are for a reason. Let me just be clear. I'm 40 years old. I still need safeguards for my life. There are things that I can't cross a line. I can't cross a boundary. You see what I'm saying? And there's safeguards for the teen, and there's safeguards for the young adult. And you build safeguards in your life, folks, because it only takes a few minutes to destroy your testimony. It could take several years to regain it or more. And you see here that Dinah, she has stepped out, and she stepped away from the safeguards of home, and now it's going to take her in. Shechem takes advantage of this young woman. Now, was she out there? Yes. Does that negate that he's responsible? Not at all. Notice here that we see that we are warned that if such conduct is committed, it is done so against one's own flesh. I turned away here, but look at Proverbs chapter number 6. You know what the Bible has to say about a man, and this would probably include a lady as well. You know, there are some sins that sin against your neighbor, maybe you stole something, but here's what the Lord has to say about sin such as this. Proverbs chapter 6, verse number 32. But whoso committeth adultery with a woman lacketh understanding. He that doeth it destroyeth his own soul. You think about a man that has a family, has a wife, has children, it couldn't be better. When you do that, you have sinned against your own soul. You've destroyed your trust with your wife. You've destroyed your trust with your children. You've destroyed your trust with your friends. You've destroyed everything that you've built. Now that's scary. As a man, that's scary. Okay? Because it's not just, oh, I stole this item. You've committed a sin on so many fronts. And it's something you may not be able to, it's going to take years to regain. Now, notice here too that this intimacy was forbidden. Notice that the sons of Jacob said, which thing ought not to be done. And I've already stated this, but God has forbidden this kind of act outside of marriage. The Lord's clear. We've already read it. It's against God's law. I think God, if that's in your past, the Lord is a forgiving God. He can forgive and restore, but it's against God's law. Notice also that this was a bad person. Shechem was simply a bad man, a bad young man. You say, well, he liked the young woman. Well, then it should have been handled differently. It should have been handled right. You see, a good man does not do such an act. A good man would have handled it the right way. But we're dealing with the people in the land. We're dealing with people in Canaan. We're dealing with people that are wrong, right? You see, some of the things mentioned in Scripture of Shechem gives us an instructive picture of the work of sin. Let's give some comparisons here, and we'll take a break here in just a minute. Notice his appeal. Shechem had some appeal about him. And this is something that happens with a lot of young women. Notice that he had position. He was a member of the ruling family. Think about it for just a minute. He was the son of the prince of the land. He was popular. He was highly esteemed of his position. Sin likes to be attractive, for it makes it that much more appealing. Think about it. Who's going to succumb to somebody that's absolutely ugly, right? It's not me. I think Pastor mentioned when he was in high school, he said that there was a young woman in the school here in one of the high schools in the area, and where he went to school, and he was mentioning how that, I don't know if she was a part of the cheerleading squad or maybe she was just, a popular young woman, but she had a popular boyfriend, right? Well, he was one of the all-stars on the football team. That's why everybody liked him. But he was a bad young man because he basically took his car door and slammed her head into it. You know what she did? Went right back to him. Popularity. But that's not love. That's abuse. That's not love. That's control. See, sin looks appealing, but that young woman's probably got a scar today because of her being attracted to the wrong person. And so sin will do that to you. We also see his adulteration. She was defiled by him. And so, again, we see that sin does this. Sin will defile you. Just as what happened here with Dinah, sin will defile the individual. It'll mess you up. Such is the course of sin. It only debases those that it touches. The further you go down the road of sin, the further it's going to debase who you are. And we also see it never cleans up character. It rather corrupts character. Look at James chapter number 1. See, wisdom, righteousness, holiness, the things of God will clean your life up and will put you on the right road. Sin, on the other hand, will only take you further down a road that's going to destroy you and debase your character. James chapter 1, verse number 15. Notice something here. Now let's pull back to verse number 13. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. And sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death. Notice that sin only destroys. Now, I know a lot of this is simple, folks. I know it's simple tonight. But sometimes that's a good thing. Sin will destroy, and it will destroy who you are. And so we see that it only bases and it only destroys what it touches. We also see his affection. Time and time again, the Scripture speaks of his affection of Dinah. Notice here, I just have them written out here, but verse number 3, it says, his soul clave unto her. Verse number 3 also says, he loved the damsel. Verse number 8 says that he longeth for your daughter. This is where Hamor comes and speaks to Jacob. Verse number 19 says, he had delight in Jacob's daughter. You see, sin, just like Shechem, wants you to believe it's so loving and caring about you. You say, well, sin doesn't say that. No, but the people in sin and the things of sin does, right? Somebody in sin, the world's going to tell you all kinds of things. Whether it be a job that is questionable, and they'll tell you just how important you are for them, and maybe they want you to do something that goes against your principles, your character. They might say all manner of things to you to get you to do something, but in reality, when they're done with you and you're no longer useful, kick you to the curb. I'll give you a great example. Most of Hollywood, actors and actresses. I don't know about modern day so much, but I do know 50, 60 years ago, you read some of the stories, a lot of the actresses that had jobs, by the time they hit middle age, there's more than one occasion where you read that there's some that was found dead because they jumped. Why? The world was done with them. You see, that's the thing about the world and sin. When it's done with you, hey, we don't need you anymore. We can't use you because you're not any use anymore. And that's sin. Sin will say all manner of things until it gets what it wants. Notice, too, the articulation. Verse number 3 tells us that he spake kindly unto her. You see, again, it says he spoke kindly. He didn't treat her kindly. He forced her. He took her. He did what he wanted. See, again, this is the smooth, sweet-talking voice of sin. Proverbs 5:3 tells us the adulteress is one whose mouth is smoother than oil. Why do you think the Bible describes that way? Because, hey, she could smoothly talk. And we've already read what that end is. Verse 4 goes on to tell us that but her end is as wormwood. See, sin beguiles with the tongue. They say that, young ladies, those watching, those here, a woman goes by what she can hear. A man will say all manner of things until he gets what he wants. And then a man goes by what he sees. Sin knows how to entrap. Sin beguiles, whether with the tongue or with what's seen. We also see his aggressiveness. He took her, and we also see that he told his father, get me this damsel to wife. In many ways, you can think about Samson. He tells his parents, get me this woman for she pleases me. Right? He's acting like a man of the world. While he was supposed to be a judge in Israel, he's acting like a man of the world. He's going by what he can see. Listen. And again, I don't know of anybody, but there may be someone watching, someone in the sound of my voice. Listen, if that's your attitude and what you want, you're acting like the world. You're talking like the world. You're acting like the world. You're not acting like the spiritual man. You're acting like the carnal man. I've got to have that. I deserve that. Wait a minute. That's a voice of pride. That's the voice of arrogance. That's the voice of a carnal person and not the voice of a Christian. You see, Shechem was forceful in his conduct, even with his own father. And he was forceful with what he did with Dinah. You see, sin does not play games. It's aggressive. Therefore, to fight sin effectively, you must fight it earnestly. Listen, that's why I've said before, each and every morning when you wake up as a Christian, it's another fight. It's another, you're going to battle with the forces of evil in your life, because Christianity is not for the weak. Christianity is a hard thing. People think that Christianity is for the weak and beggarly. No, it's not, because if you want to live a life, and see, I'm saying apart from salvation, if you're a child of God, you're saved, you're sealed. But your practice is something that's fought on a daily basis, because sin is out to destroy you. Now, it's 6:55. We're going to take a break. We'll take a break till about 5 after 7, thereabouts. And when we come back, we'll start back on the bottom of page 216. We'll talk about this place. We'll talk about the path. We'll talk about the things here that takes place. But we're also going to talk about, at the end of the day, and we'll get to this, it's not just Shechem and his father and the people of the land that are at fault. This is handled entirely wrong. And there's sin and blame to go around everywhere in this story. In reality, chapter 34 is a chapter that really is a sad, sad chapter in the chapters of the book of Genesis, because of what takes place, and things could have been vastly different. So let's take a break here. We'll take a break till about 6 after 7. Thank you. Okay, I want to welcome you back from the break. We are in chapter number 34, speaking about Jacob in the land of Shechem. Notice that that is referenced. I don't know if I really pointed that out in our first half, but you see that in verse 18 of chapter number 33. It says, "And Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem." And so we are in the land of Shechem at this point. Of course, the son of Haran is also named that as well. But notice here that this place, simply put, was not where Jacob should have been. God wanted his family in Bethel. And listen, when you get outside the will of God and you stray from the Lord, you put yourself and your family in a bad position. And I'm not saying that, as soon as you do something like that, bad things are going to happen and, your children are going to be messed up. But what I am telling you is that when you knowingly go against God's will, you open yourself up for trouble. Now, that's also not saying that if you are in God's will, that nothing bad's ever going to happen. You say, well, then how can I be sure? I'll tell you this, stay in God's will, because God is in your corner, so to speak. You're on His side. And again, every young person has a free will. Every young person they're going to have to make their own decisions. But if you go against the will of God, you open yourself up for problems. And again, that's not to say when you're in God's will, you're not going to have your share of problems, but you're going to be on the side of God and God fighting for you. And I would rather take my, lack of a better word to use, I would rather take my chances with God than I would going against the will of God. And so Jacob here is positioning himself, like I said at the start, when we came into chapter number 34, he's positioned himself for trouble. And notice here that if Jacob had obeyed God's command and moved to Bethel, as he will be exhorted again to do so after this evil occurrence, he could have avoided all of this. Why? Well, he'd have went to Bethel, right? Remember, chapter number 31, look over here real quick with me. It's just a couple of pages over. Chapter number 31, look at verse number 13. 31:13. It says, "I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out of from this land, and return to the land of thy kindred." And remember what he had told him when he first left? He said, when you come back, come here and worship me. That is all the way back in, don't have it directly in front of me here, but chapter 28. Notice chapter number 28, he's in Bethel here. And just a second here, let me see if I can find it real quick. Let's see here. 19, thank you, brother. Verse number 19, "And he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of that city was called Luz at the first." It's where the Lord actually speaks to him and says, he says, "Behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac." Verse 13, "The land wherein thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed, and thy seed shall be at the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in the place where thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee until I have done unto that which I have spoken thee of." And Jacob awaked out of his sleep, and he said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not." And he was afraid and said, "How dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." And we see here, he says here in verse number 21, "So that I come again into my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God, and this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give thee the tenth unto thee." Now notice here, look on back to chapter number 34. Chapter number 34, And let's see here. It says here, chapter number 35. Verse 1 says, And God said unto Jacob, Arise, go up to Bethel, and dwell there, and make there an altar unto God that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. So the Lord's already called him to worship him. And the Lord's already called him, and Jacob's already said, I will worship the Lord back in the land. So now the Lord reiterates to him in verse number 1 of chapter number 35, Go to Bethel. This is where Jacob was supposed to go. This is where Jacob was supposed to worship the Lord. So what is Jacob? He's not at Bethel. He's not in the house of God. He's away from the house of God. He's away from the place where the Lord had told him to come and worship. And so he is away from where he should have been. Now, notice also, if Jacob had went back to the place where he had first when he left the land, if he went back to where the Lord had spoken to him last, all of this could have been avoided. Now, in application, we see this in many Christians' lives. If we would just stay in the will of God and work inside the will of God, there's a lot of things in this life that we bring upon ourselves. We do. Not only that, we also see the bad path. Dinah, the daughter of Leah, and we've mentioned this already, but went out to see the daughters of the land. Dinah's path was another cause of the massacre that's going to take place. Remember, we said that Shechem, he's responsible for this, but in a way, Dinah's responsible for this. But they're not the only ones. But Dinah, she had went out to see the daughters of the land. We've already mentioned much of this already, so I was kind of ahead of myself in this. We make the statement here that this is a great picture of the young people in Christian homes that look out into this world and they see something, they think it looks nice, they think it looks pretty, but it's not. So she yielded to the tug of the things of the land, of the world, and unfortunately she learned too late that it cost her too much. You know, separation is not a popular word today. Separation, holy living, holiness is not a popular word. But there's some merit to it. To have a desire to live a pure life for the Lord, it's necessary to have separation. A lack of separation will bring ruined character in a person's life every single time. We can also make the statement that we have a set of bad parents here. The parents of Shechem gave him no moral compass by which to live. You said, well, that's the kind of people. Hence you have the world. And that's why we understand that the Bible tells us not to be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. You see, the parents of Shechem gave him no moral compass. It also seems that Jacob and Leah felt Dinah in not restricting her. Maybe they did. Maybe she ventured out on her own. I don't know. But there was a lack of some direction here. Such is the true with parents today. A child left to themselves brings their parents to shame. Or as Proverbs 29:15 tells us, a child left to himself brings his mother to shame. You know, the other work that I do, and I won't say too much there because, I mean, it is what I do. But you see it. You know the parents that are invested. My other job is driving a school bus. Trust me, you might only be half an hour, but you sure get a sense of children that are left to themselves. There is no direction. And it is a shame because while this doesn't necessarily work in our minds all the time, it's true that a child that actually has boundaries, parameters, is actually a more secure child. Children need structure. Children need boundaries because they understand what's expected. When a child doesn't have boundaries, they don't know what's expected, and so they don't have any compass. They don't have any understanding of how to act. It's actually a good thing for children to have boundaries because it builds structure, it builds character, it builds understanding. It's natural to have boundaries. And when boundaries are not there, it actually is a form of destruction for them. So their leniency costs them the virtue of their children. We also see a bad prince. So we've had a bad path, bad parents, bad prince. Bad prince. You say, well, who's the bad prince? Well, it's his father. And this is a reflection of bad government. Do you know bad government will always produce evil? Hamor, the prince and father of Shechem, shows no remorse, unfavorable feeling towards Shechem's actions. What does he do? Here in chapter number 34, it says here in Hamor, the father of Shechem, verse number 6, went out into Jacob to commune with him, and the sons of Jacob came out of the field when they heard it. Verse number 8, and Hamor communed with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longeth for your daughter. I pray you give her to him to wife. Was there any kind of, this is what's happened, I'm sorry for what's happened? Not at all. You know what government today is, many times what you see? Number one, we see that he makes no apology to Jacob or his sons for the conduct that's taken place. But also you see Hamor's attitude is classic of today's government. Their position today towards sin is the turning of a blind eye, especially when there's a buck to be made. Think about it. State lotteries, gambling houses, alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, pot, name it. Oh, we can tax it. Fine. It's not happened here in this state yet, but I challenge you to take a flight or a drive west. I've been in Arizona, I've been in California especially. My wife and I, a few years ago, we took a trip from Arizona, drove over to California. We got down into San Diego, and we come down to a corner, and there's a guy standing there with signs telling you which direction to go for the marijuana house. Recreation marijuana. In Arizona, it's medical. But, you can find a medical release for anything if you really want it. While they say it's medical, there's signs, billboards that says, order your pizza and your marijuana. I thought this was medical only. Listen, and you know why? Because there's taxes. There's tax dollars at work. There was a day when gambling was only found in Las Vegas and a few other spots. Now it's all over the place, especially on reservations. Because why? Money. We can tax it. So we'll just control it that way. The only problem is it's not a control. Because if you ever hear or read the advertisements for state lotteries, oh, and by the way, if you have a gambling addiction, please call blah, 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 blah. Yeah. I mean, come on, people. I know you say, well, you're off topic. I am, but I'm not. Because here's what government does. Here's what happens when evil reigns, folks. We don't care about the individual. Oh, we'll give some money so they can get rehab, just so they can go back again and gamble again at some point. Well, if it's causing that kind of moral degradation, stop. Just stop. You're not, and here's the thing. The book of Romans tells us that he holdeth not the sword in vain. He's supposed to reward the righteous and judge the wicked. When government upturns what their role is, that's what you have. Because now they're rewarding wickedness and they're putting down righteousness. And it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong. And what do you have a classic example? You say, well, this is a father and son. It is, but Hamor is supposed to be the prince of the land. And what is he doing? No ill word about what took place. Because wickedness is reigning. Now, I said Hamor and Shechem and Dinah is not the only ones here to be blamed. Because here's what's going to happen. The wrath of some boys is going to go too far. In Genesis chapter number 34, we've already read a few of these. Notice here, the sons of Jacob came out of the field, verse number 7, when they heard it. And the men were grieved, and they were very wroth, because he had wrought folly in Israel in lying with Jacob's daughter, which thing ought not to be done. Now, a couple of things that we see here. We see the rage for the craftiness, so the craftiness for the bloodshed. There's going to be some blood that's going to be shed. And notice here, the sons of Jacob, they hear about what's happened, and they're extremely upset over what has happened with their sister Dinah. The word grieved and wroth indicates this fact. The rage, however, was not so much about virtue as it was about the vindication. You see, it's something that ought not to be. And here's where it separates. It goes from we're upset, but we're not just upset about what took place to Dinah. We're upset about the family name. We're upset. We're enraged about what's took place here. You see, the brothers were not on a campaign of righteousness, as later they would also sell their brother Joseph to slavery. See, here's the kind of young men we have. You say, well, if they were enraged and they were being righteous, then why do we find later that some of these same young men are going to sell their brother into slavery? Genesis 37:28. Reuben was immoral with one of his father's handmaids. That's just in the next chapter, chapter 35, verse number 22. And Judah was immoral with his dead son's widow. That's in Genesis chapter number 38. So what may have started out for right things is going to end for wrong things. These brothers' obvious rage was because it was their sister who was defiled, and thus it was a reproach unto them. They were more concerned about their honor than they were about holiness. And think about it. This is the way mankind is today. You know, a man can show indignation against evil, but it's not necessarily because it is evil, but because it has caused them a loss of gain or glory. Think about it with me for just a minute. Sometimes the reason someone's upset, it's not always for the right reason. Sometimes it's because of what they lost in it, in a situation. Simeon and Levi are going to take advantage of this situation very shortly. Now notice the request that's going to be made in all of this. Notice verse number 8. It says, And Hamor communed with them, saying, The soul of my son Shechem longeth for your daughter. I pray you give her him to wife. Verse number 9. And make ye marriages with us, and give your daughters unto us, and take our daughters unto you. And ye shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade ye therein, and get you possessions therein. And Shechem said unto her father, and unto her brethren, Let me find grace in your eyes, and what ye shall say unto me I will give. Ask me never so much dowry and gift, and I will give according as ye shall say unto me, but give me the damsel to wife. And the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father deceitfully, and said, Because he hath defiled Dinah their sister. And they said unto them, We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one that is uncircumcised, for that were a reproach unto us. But in this will we consent unto you, if you will be as we be, that every male of you be circumcised. Then will we give our daughters unto you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. Now, a couple of things take place here. Number one, Hamor and Shechem, as bad as they were, on the surface at least, they're offering the opportunity for them, to come to some type of understanding and consensus, and them to dwell in the land with each other. Now, what you're going to see is their offer and their hearts aren't as good as you think they are. And we'll point that out in just a few minutes. But notice something here. Notice we see that their request is one that's unhindered. Shechem's father did not hinder or restrain the request. Practically, his father had never told him no. We also see that the request was an unholy one. This request was unholy as it urged God's people to marry those of the world. Remember, Abraham had forbidden his son Isaac to marry a Canaanite. And we say here for the New Testament Christian today, we're instructed not to be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. That's 2 Corinthians 6:14. Those that would be bad for a New Testament Christian. We also see that it was an unsparing request. Shechem was very promising. He was willing to give any kind of dowry, money, property that he needed for Dinah. And just like Shechem, sin is always full of promises for great gain if we will do as it says. As we've already stated, sin never tells you about all the victims it's taken out. We also see that it was an unblushing request. There was absolutely no evidence of shame in Shechem or Hamor for the despicable act. And you know what you find later about the Israelites? Mankind isn't all that different. If the Israelites later, and I have the verses here, notice it says in Jeremiah 6:15, it says, were they ashamed, speaking about Israel, were they ashamed when they had committed abomination? Nay, they were not at all ashamed, neither could they blush. And Jeremiah 3:3 says, thou hast a whore's forehead, thou refusest to be ashamed. You know what? Sin ought to make the Christian blush. It should. But unfortunately, the world, in this body of flesh, the world over time deadens us to be ashamed, to not blush for the things that we've done or the things that we've thought of or the things that we've committed. You ever seen a young Christian, or maybe even a young person that's come up in church, and early on you'll see that maybe they hear something that bothers them and they'll blush. That's a wonderful thing. You say, oh, that's so funny. No, it's not. That ought to be a good thing. The world looks at it and laughs. If you as a Christian think that's funny, then that tells me your heart. That's actually a nice thing. It's a good thing. Because that tells me that they've not been pumped with the impurities of this world yet. Because eventually you start to get deadened to being able to blush. The Bible talks about that, the blushing. Notice there, we saw that there in Jeremiah. You know, it's bad enough to have committed the act, but then to show no shame tells just how bad the heart has turned from the things of God. Turn over to Jeremiah chapter number 5. Again, this will be about Israel, but I think it's good for us to see. And I know, again, this is the nation. But what about the individual? The individual. Jeremiah 5:3, it says, O Lord, are not thine eyes upon the truth? Thou hast stricken them, but they have not grieved. Thou hast consumed them, but they have refused to receive correction. They have made their faces harder than a rock. They have refused to return. It's talking about God's people. He says, you've stricken them. Had no effect. Notice there. Thou hast consumed them, but they refused to receive correction. So God is trying, the Lord is trying to get the hearts of the people to respond by letting bad things happen, and yet His people aren't responding in the right manner. It's like a parent giving correction and it doesn't work. Then that parent ups it by maybe not sparing the rod, and yet there's no change. And then finally that parent maybe takes some privileges away and takes some things away from that child and trying to get them to turn, and they don't turn. That's what God's trying to do. That's what God was trying to do with the people. He's sending judgment. He's saying, oh, that feels bad. Oh, I don't like that. Okay, let me turn it up a little bit more. Oh, they still don't respond in the right manner until it gets to the breaking point. There should have been some shame, but there's no shame. Look at Zechariah chapter number 7. Zechariah chapter number 7. Zechariah 7, look at verse number 11 when you get over there. Again, we see the Lord dealing with the people. In Zechariah 7, verse number 11, it says, but they refused to hearken and pulled away the shoulder and stopped their ears that they should not hear. Yea, they made their hearts as an adamant stone, lest they should hear the law and the words which the Lord of hosts had sent in His Spirit by the former prophets. Therefore came a great wrath from the Lord of hosts. Notice that first verse there. It says, but they refused to hearken. and pulled away the shoulder. I've seen my children do that a couple of times, and when they've done that, that's turn away and start walking away, and it's like, hey, get over here right now. You don't walk away when I'm talking to you. That's what you have going on here. It's like a bratty child. The Lord's trying to get their attention, and what do? They pull away the shoulder. What you've got going on, the Lord's trying to get a hold of them and trying to get their attention, and they go, I'm not listening to you. And notice here it goes on, and stop their ears. You ever it's not funny, really. Do you ever seen a child when they got another friend, and sometimes a parent, and this is when it really, the rubber meets the road, and you ever seen that? They don't want to hear you. Stop the ears. But what's going on? It's a whole nation. And the Lord's trying to get their attention. And they've pulled away the shoulder. They've stopped the ears so they should not hear. Yea, they made their hearts as an adamant stone. It's hard. Unbreakable. You've heard of the stony heart. And the appeal to have a fleshly heart that can be worked with and pliable, and will hear and will listen and will respond, lest they should hear the law and the words which the Lord hath said. And that's what you have to contend with. And so we see the heart and the response. And in Genesis 34, we've also read here, 13, 15 here, we notice the corruption, the requirements and the craftiness. There's corruption in the requirement. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, deceitfully. That is, there was some craftiness here. There's like, how can we get back? How can we do what we want to do with this? So they have feigned acceptance. That is, when something's feigned, it's fake. It's not real. They feigned acceptance. Oh, yeah, that sounds good. Now, here's what you've got to do. Well, remember that in reality, circumcision was for the household of Abraham and the servants that would be brought in and bought. So what does the sons of Jacob do? Oh, yeah, we got a requirement. You've got to do this. Well, the truth is, they had no intention of accepting them into the family. This is all fake, folks. They feigned acceptance so that they might, and their wheels were already turning in how they could get the advantage out of this. That's wicked. And so I say, yes, what Shechem and Hamor and the people, what had happened was wrong. But in reality, it's Shechem that had done wrong. But you know what's going to happen? Shechem's action is going to cause the death of himself, his father, and the men of the land. And that's why sin starts small. And I'm not saying what he did was small. You understand. But it was here. It was a small unit. And it's going to spread, and it's going to affect the people under the rule of Hamor. Listen, sin has a way of affecting so many. So we see the completeness of this as that it not only, and see, if it was just Shechem, why couldn't he just be the one? Why did it have to be all the men? Well, if they had stepped back and thought about this requirement, why is it just, oh, well, yeah, that's right, we want all the people. But why? And notice here that they're content. The words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. And notice here, those who have given themselves to sin and who condone sin will be deceived with sin. Oh, I'm going to get something out of this. Oh, yeah, this sounds great, but they missed something here. There's a reason for all of this. See, they will rejoice in that which will kill them. Think about it. Alcohol, drugs, adultery, fornication. They are rejoicing in something that is going to take their life. Now, Look at verse number 19. I'm going to go ahead and read down. We're just going to read on down here. Verse number, let's see, it says here, verse number 19, and the young man deferred not to do the thing because he had delight in Jacob's daughter, and he was more honorable than all the house of his father. And Hamor and Shechem, his son, came into the gate of their city and communed with the men of their city, saying, these men are peaceable with us. Therefore let them dwell in the land and trade therein, for the land, behold, it is large enough for them. And let us take their daughters for us for wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only herein will the men consent unto us for us to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. Now notice verse 23. Notice what's blinding their eyes. Shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Do you know what they're seeing? Oh, there's an advantage here. We're going to get what they have. You see what's happening? Look at all the wealth they've got. It can be ours too. Do you know what's blinding their eyes? Material possession. What can we get out of it? What's advantageous for us? Oh, look, this is great. This will be good for us. Only let us consent unto them, and they will dwell with us. And unto Hamor and unto Shechem his son hearkened to all that went out of the gate of his city, and every male was circumcised, all that went out of the gate of his city. So what do we see here? We see the assembly. They ratify the men of the city. They agree to it. We see that they advocate for it. We also see that the bottom line in advocating the circumcision was greed. It was greed. Oh, their possessions will be our possessions. And so Hamor and Shechem only saw profit as the big result in sanctioning this action. But their greed will result in the annihilation of the populace. And so what has happened? And the young man, Shechem, deferred not to do this thing. And every male was circumcised, all that went out of the gate of the city. And we note this, that sin always places you on the fast track in a downward spiral to degradation and destruction. And that is the deal that's going to happen. Now notice here, verse number 25, and I'm going to try to wrap us up for this evening. Look at verse 25. And it came to pass on the third day, when they were sore, that two of the sons of Jacob, notice who takes this a step further. Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brethren, took each man his sword, and came upon the city boldly, and slew all the males. And they slew Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and went out. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain, and spoiled the city, because they had defiled their sister. They took their sheep, and their oxen, and their asses, and that which was in the city, and that which was in the field, and all their wealth, and all their little ones, and their wives took they captive, and spoiled even all that was in the house. Now notice here. The slayers and the casualty was that of Simeon and Levi. You see, Simeon and Levi were the full brothers of Dinah, their mother being Leah. But they took this a step further in that they caused the bloodshed. They massacred the people in Shechem, the men. And Simeon and Levi will be remembered later by what they did. Turn over, if you will, to Genesis 49. Not only did they deceive the populace, not only did they, with the hands of their brothers, deceive these people, they are the two that went in and they slew all the men of the city with the sword. In Genesis 49, verse number 5, we read this. It says, Simeon and Levi are brethren. And this is Jacob. Jacob is on his deathbed. Jacob is giving prophecy about the future of the tribes that would come forth from these boys. But he's also, what's affecting the outcome in all of these is what they have done as individuals. And this is what he has to say. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret. Under their assembly, mine honor, be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man. and in their self-will they dig down a wall. In their anger they slew a man. You know what that's referring to? What they did right here. What should have been righteous indignation was taken too far, and they slew a man. They murdered someone. You say, well, what he did was wrong. Yes, but to take that into the matters in their own hands and do it that way, they were instruments of cruelty, is what the Bible says. They took it a step too far. So this evil, and not only did they do it to Shechem, they killed Hamor. They killed the men of the city. Those men of the city didn't do that. Shechem did that. And so they killed some people out of anger, and they slew the blood of these people. And so you see Simeon and Levi, but this doesn't stop here. Notice something here, and I'm going to skip down. Notice the spoil from the casualties. It just wasn't Simeon and Levi. Notice back in Genesis 34. It says, the sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city because they had defiled their sister. Do you know that Simeon and Levi slew? But do you know that, notice something here, that it seems that the sons of Jacob, the sons, went a step further, and they came in and they spoiled the city as a whole. All the sons of Jacob. See, the Shechemites had planned to take the wealth of the family of Jacob. Remember? Genesis 34:23. They said, their cattle, their horse, all these things will be ours. However, it was the Shechemites that instead lost everything they had. And we note this saying, those who unjustly grasp at that which is another's justly lose that which is their own. Those who unjustly grasp at that which is another's justly lose that which is their own. You try to take something that's not yours, you justly lose that which is yours. So this truth does not acquit the sons of Jacob, but it does show the truth of what happens to those that are greedy of gain. Notice the participants. The sons of Jacob spoiled the city. While it was Simeon and Levi that slew the people, it was all the sons of Jacob that spoiled the city of its goods. So while the other sons were not guilty of bloodshed, it would seem that they were still guilty of profiting from the crime. Therefore, they were accessories to the crime. They profited from it. And so they took all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives. So this indicates that it was a complete spoiling of the city. And the children and wives became servants. Now, a couple of comments on the bloodshed that was taking place here. Verse number 30. And Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, ye have troubled me to make me to stink among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and I being few in number. They shall gather themselves together against me and slay me, and I shall be destroyed, I and my house. And they said, should he deal with our sister as with an harlot? And that's where the chapter ends. Here's some takeaway on all this. Jacob was the head of his home. Simeon and Levi were wrong in how far they took this. And when we've talked about Jacob, how some things he's grown into as a person, as a patriarch. But here's some things to think about on the flip side of all that. Jacob is standing here. His concern, it would seem his concern is that what has taken place now, I will stink among the inhabitants of the land. Okay, Dad, are you only concerned about how we're perceived here because of what happened to Dinah? That's an interesting takeaway for Jacob, because it seems as if he's only concerned about the perception of the Canaanites and the people in the land, and that he's now going to be hunted. Really. See, Jacob was hypocritical in that he blamed his sons for his trouble. In reality, as we've already stated, if Jacob had been obedient to the Lord, none of this would have happened. And Jacob has two concerns. he voices two major concerns in verse number 30. And the concerns that Jacob voiced said much of his character in the situation at hand. Number one, his concern was of honor. He voiced his concern over the loss of honor. He would stink among the inhabitants. You know something, we see people will complain about the loss of honor quicker than they will over the loss of holiness. You're more concerned about your wealth, you're more concerned about your position, your prestige, but are you concerned about your holiness with God? Is that job that you have, is it more important than your holiness, your walk with God? If your job tomorrow asks you to do something that would be questionable of your position as a Christian, would you do it? Or would you walk away and say, I cannot do that, even if it means my job? I can't go with that person because that might be perceived bad. Or I can't do that over there because that would be against my convictions as a Christian. I can't take that trip because that would be in question. Is that more important to you than your position? The other thing that you see is his concern of harm. He voiced his concern that he was afraid that the Canaanites would harm him. So it would seem he was more concerned about physical harm than he was about moral harm. That's what I see. And you have Simeon and Levi. I said, well, should he have dealt with our sister as with an harlot? You're more concerned about your physical harm, Dad, but what about Dinah? What about all these things that we see here? And so you see the character that comes out. We also see the condoning of bloodshed. Levi and Simeon said, should he deal with our sister as with an harlot? Their response rebuked Jacob for being more concerned about his honor and harm than Dinah's holiness, but here's the thing, but did not justify their bloody massacre. It wasn't right that they took this as far as they did, because you know what's going to happen? Jacob is going to say as much in Genesis chapter 49, up on his deathbed. And so in all this, the takeaway of chapter number 34, everyone in this chapter, they're doing something that if they had been right with God, it probably would not have occurred. Their actions, you see the actions of a carnal person and not that of one that's walking with God. Dinah's not walking with God. The people of the land's certainly not walking with God. Jacob's not walking with God like he should. Simeon and Levi are not walking with God. It would seem the sons of Jacob aren't. They're going and taking the spoil. Everyone in this chapter, there's a problem here. And what do we take away from it? What we take away from it is our own lives. How are we? What's our first concern as a Christian? And that's the lesson tonight. Everything we've covered this evening can be and may be on a quiz next week. Thank you all so much. It is 7:50, a little bit longer than I intended. Brother, what time did you want to get started? 8:05. So Brother Hollingsworth will be back at 8:05 for those online. Thank you all very much. Thank you for this evening, and the Lord bless you.